Hello and welcome to Life Beyond the Numbers, the podcast for those curious about creating a more fulfilling work life. Every business boils down to two basics: people and money. Here we focus on the human side. Numbers matter, but people matter most, and people drive performance. I'm Susan Ní, your host, a coach, consultant, facilitator, and author of Leading Beyond the Numbers. It brings me joy to speak to people and explore together how, although we share many similarities as humans, each of us navigates the world through our own unique lens. This adds intricacy to our interactions and contributes to both the depth and difficulties of interpersonal relationships. Join us for stories, strategies, and insights to help you lead your life beyond the numbers. Well, today I am absolutely delighted to welcome Carissa Bub to Life Beyond the Numbers. Carissa, you're so welcome.
Oh, I'm so delighted to be here. Susan, thank you so much for inviting me and to be met by such a big smile and a warm hearth of a human being is really great. So thank you.
You're welcome. I'm particularly looking forward to this because we're going to talk about something that I'm not sure people really want to talk about. So it might be interesting to shine a light on silence.
Yeah.
We've had some back and forth prior to this conversation, but something you said is how we're going to leap into this conversation, if that's okay with you, because you made a reference to the first episode of 2025, my solo episode, and a powerful scene from the movie Conclave. And you said it was like a really good demonstration of how uncertainty and silence interweave in leadership moments that matter.
Yes.
So, what is it about silence, Carissa?
In the movie, there's this moment where the person who's running this big event, who's effectively leading this incredibly important process on behalf of the Vatican and the church. And he's doubting himself. He's lost. He doesn't know which way to turn. There's also the reference to potentially a shadow, a part of himself that he doesn't even realize that he too wants to be Pope. He's not just facilitating it, but he too may have a part of himself that is hidden to him. And he's challenged by one of his colleagues, and he sits at the edge of his bed and he goes into prayer, which is what his practice for tapping into the fertile void which silence offers you. And the truth is, at least I've always thought that life is not a problem to be solved, it's a mystery to be unfolded. And so in this moment, he's going deep to the source, to listen, deeply listen to his inner self, which is a self that is connected to a much bigger energy field, and to really sense into his, not only his moral compass, but to really listen, deeply listen to what is being asked of him. What is he being called to do? What is the possibility of this present moment now? And who does he need to be to meet it? And leadership is about that all the time. If I think about my clients, that's what they're having to do all the time. And the world is throwing more and more uncertainty at us. There is a faster and faster pace, as we know. We're on the edge of multiple tipping points. We're moving into a world beyond our understanding. And I speak about this because 10 years ago, I was somebody who was working with those same leaders who I am now and asking myself with that same doubt, am I actually big enough to be a conduit for change, to be a container, to hold the space for these CEOs, these founders, these mission-driven leaders who are responsible for big systemic and systems change to actually hold that space, the amount of complexity. And I felt, no, no. And so I did a radical act, which was to go and take myself offline, which takes some courage, and find somebody to really kick me around a bit in the nicest possible loving sense, to really understand, really listen more deeply to what is it that's wanting to emerge with me, and how do you expand your presence and be that authentic presence that allows those very courageous conversations to happen. So I've said a lot, so I'll stop there for a minute and let you ask another question.
No, thank you, Carissa. And I mean, there was a lot in that. I liked the term you used, fertile void. And I'm getting the image of a wellspring. So it's almost like when you find that place of settling in silence, that the flow will begin. Yet, I think silence is something we're afraid of. We don't want to be in silence. We want the distraction. So, how do you invite people into that world?
Yeah. So first I want to answer or speak to this idea that silence can be frightening, it can be scary. And I want to acknowledge that some people may use silence as a sort of psychological weapon, if you want. I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about that we can all feel the awkwardness of silence. And one of the reasons it's so awkward is usually we're holding our breath. So one of the ways to invite people into silence is to get them into breath. It's to go into the body. We all know the rise of somatic coaching and body leadership, that it is to allow yourself to really experience silence as an inner resource, something that already sits within you. And to stillness, to really stop. The easiest thing is to focus on breath and to ground yourself by putting and relaxing your feet on the floor. It is that simple, to actually allow the space within, the breath within, and just to be with the experience, whatever it is. The content actually doesn't matter as much. What matters is they're allowing the fullness of the experience without judgment. And then you get to a presence, you get to a sort of authentic presence, and you're able to handle it and hold it, breathe into it, breathe through it, into what wants to emerge next. And this, I think, is the key. Plans are great, but we're working with more and more emergent change. And that's what leaders need to do today, is work out how do you work with what is there. It's not that the silence starts when you tap into it. It's always there. It's how do we tap into it and use it, listen more deeply to ourselves and to others, and to the everything's energy, the bigger source that is available to bring some insight into whatever we're facing in the moment.
And we live in an active world, a world where doing, forging ahead, all of these kind of terms that we have are like religion, you could almost say, back to conclave. So when you introduce this concept to a leader who is used to going, doing, is there resistance? Or do people know?
First, you need to show up in that space yourself. So we are our practices and we are our patterns, right? So we are our practices. And this is why I did what I did, because when you can show up with that stillness and that calmness yourself, I'm also a coaching supervisor, and a lot of my the feedback I get is you kind of walk the talk when it comes to that, cultivating that stillness. Other leaders will say you're so calm. Bring the breath with you, bring the spaciousness with you. And it kind of is infectious. It creates a different vibrational field in the room. So unconsciously, you see the ease, the flowing. And so when I might suggest it, and of course, we're not going to go into a 20-minute mindfulness practice or something. It's something as simple as just notice your feet. And you would be amazed how often people have said to me, that was really useful when you told me to just put my feet on the floor. Very simple, right? And I don't want to give a theory or an explanation often. It's an experience. And when somebody suddenly experiences the easing and the presence, and they can suddenly connect with their observer, right? The observer self that can see themselves. And then they realize, actually, if I keep practicing this, the space grows a little bit bigger and wider. And suddenly I not only have awareness, I have some choice in this moment how to respond, not just react from fear. They can feel the anxiety, they understand what releases the anxiety, and then they understand, yeah, actually, I can do this.
There's a beautiful simplicity to it, isn't there? It's something like you said that earlier, that it's already there. It's a resource to be tapped into. And I think for many of us, well, I'm generalizing, but it's not the first thing that comes to mind. And often it's like, we need to focus more rather than just stop.
Yeah. Another way is if you're, especially with a team, you can just say, let's just pause for a minute and write. So reflective writing. Again, it creates the same sort of energetic shift. And you can hear the silence emerging in the room, right? You can hear the sound of silence. There's a peace that comes with it, a harmony that comes from it. It offers an opportunity for more sharing, more cooperation, less competition. So it's very generative. Yeah. So that's another way that it works, definitely. Or if you're running a retreat and you've got, everybody's sitting in a circle and there's this sudden moment where everybody just goes incredibly quiet. Either there's something deeper that's being processed, something that's not been said yet, and that takes some courage to say, or there's just this moment of deep connection and we're just savoring the moment. And what that then generates very quickly is a sense of awe and wonderment and a delight. You see a sort of delight crossing people's faces, like they've suddenly remembered something that they'd lost touch with.
So for everyone listening, I think listen back to some of that if you're curious about the power of silence. There was a LinkedIn post you wrote, Carissa, that got me to ask you to come on. You talked about silence operating in stereo. So maybe you could say more about that.
Mm. Well, I'll link that to my own personal experience during COVID. Unfortunately, it affected my left ear. So the hearing in my left ear is pretty much gone. And last year was a pretty painful process of lots of steroid injections to get rid of it. But one of the things that I did was go away for 3 days to walk in silence across Dartmoor with a small group of people. And that was the first time that I've been out in nature where I suddenly heard real dead silence, which comes from deafness in that left ear, versus the profound silence, which is tapped into listening to a much bigger energetic field, like the sound of silence. That one of my favorite songs ever of Simon
Mine too.
Garfunkel. Absolutely. Just this incredible connection to the kind of numinous or the infinite or just the everything. We talk about interconnectedness now. People get it, right? There's just this source of energy. And in the silence, and I've always thought it carries in the wind. I love listening to the wind to take me there. But when I walked across the Sinai Desert for 3 weeks, I was mostly in silence, and I really heard that stereo silence. So it is something which transcends time. Suddenly you are no longer in linear time, in chronos time. You are in kairos time, as they call it, deep time. And today, as I said, we're in this edge of these multiple tipping points, and we're all sort of asking ourselves, what do I need to do? Who do I need to be? Well, many people are. Often what comes up, even if you know the answer, do you have the courage? And there's something about tapping into that silence in stereo moment where you feel like all of what came before and all of life force has suddenly got your back. And it's just this unbelievably explosive moment. I don't do enough mindfulness meditation or deep meditation to say I've lost my sense of self. But in that moment, you can honestly say that you are interconnected with a force of energy, which is just like feeling like superhuman. And the ego is completely quiet because something much, much bigger has emerged. And that's just huge. We talk about unlocking human potential in organizations. Well, imagine if this became more of a practice. What's possible?
Yeah, absolutely. And perhaps a very simple glimpse of that is because you talked about awe and wonderment. When you stop to look at a sunset or a sunrise for a moment, you're not really there. You're almost part of it. And everything stops in this glorious scene that's unfolding in front of you. And it, that creates that moment of stillness and silence. I think if people are curious what this might be like, that's what I'm taking from what you're saying.
Yes. James Clear has written this book, Atomic
Yeah.
Habits, and it seems to be, crashing through the bestseller list. If you've listened to him or read it before, it is a great book.
Mm.
And really what we're talking about here is creating those micro moments to tap into something, an energetic presence of which you are part. And it's that we forget that we're part of it.
We do, because we're just tied into what we're doing and what's next. And yeah, and the mind takes over. The mind is very happy to be active all the time. So this can be transformative for leaders on a number of levels, I think, Carissa. And it would be great to hear how.
So how do you do it? So we've talked a lot about individuals. I'm a former broadcast journalist. I've done a lot of work to help in working with leaders who want to elevate their impact and strategic influence and to really maximize their legacy, right? So whether that is the business that they're building, whether that's in their tenure in the role that they're in, to really deliver on the vision that they've set out, whether it's about changing policy that's going to improve and better the world and people's lives, that element of communication never goes away. Can you really deeply, authentically connect through your presence, through your words? And people can feel when it's fake and it's not. We know, right? Can I trust this person? So for many, many years, the way I've used it is to really what I would, the power of the pause, which anybody who's helps anybody with speaking, and you do it beautifully. I've listened to a number of your podcasts, but there is nothing as powerful as just taking pause. Why don't people pause? Very often there could be a belief that, people will think I'm stupid and I've forgotten my words. It could be something like that kind of assumption. Or it's just a habit that nobody's noticing. So I've used it for many, many years in that context. But when I'm working with teams now, I deliberately create moments. The Brahman Kumaris, I don't know if anybody's heard of them, the BKs as they're called, tend to be women run from India, and really they're about peace. But they have this very neat little activity called Just a Minute. And once an hour, if you go anywhere where they are, there's a bell that goes for a minute of silence. So this just a minute. It doesn't take a long time. We know 3 deep breaths will change your state. So I will bring that in. I'll encourage reflective writing. There is always a go inward before go outward in some sort of a check-in. And really to encourage teams to make it a norm. And then again, in the organizational space, how do you create spaces for this to happen? That's more tricky in today's world, in a hybrid world. And there are well, I can't say there are many ways of doing it, but if I think about where it's worked well, is where there's a founder or the senior leader is modeling contemplation, reflection, where I'll build that. I think the reflective writing is a very powerful way when you're doing, and reflective practices. So if we're designing a program, running what I call leadership reflection circles, but they're really peer groups to encourage and deepen that awareness. And there's very often cultivating stillness, as you have to do as a coach. So many leaders today, not only having to coach individuals, but coach teams. And to be that facilitator, to show up with that presence, they need to practice more that cultivating stillness. So there's many opportunities to bring it in. And through stillness, you tap into the silence. Yeah.
Hmm. That relational piece or that group silence, that's quite powerful to get into a space where everybody's okay, settled into just being still or being silent or feeling perhaps that whatever is hoping to emerge. I think it also does something for the brain waves. It allows this collective intelligence to emerge that may not come through otherwise.
Yeah. I think what we do probably need to balance it. I was going to ask you some questions of how
Oh,
you use this, but I think we need to balance it. There's a lot of conversation. And certainly I'm known as somebody who's usually around because there's a conversation going on. So it's not about sitting in a room forever and ever and ever. However, there are times if you're sitting in a room with a team where you know it's about allowing people the opportunity where there's now enough safety, but now we need to tap into courage. Somebody needs to dare to care, right? Dare to care, to speak their truth. And there, the most useful thing can be to sit with this loving presence. Yeah, that's, that if you've really been in the presence of somebody who brings that loving presence, they don't have to say anything. It's such a deep and rich experience. So if everybody is holding that intention, then the truth can be acknowledged. And once the truth can be acknowledged, once the system can reveal itself, whether it's a team or team of teams sitting in a room, once we really acknowledge what needs to be said, and we can breathe through it, going back to that point of just without judgment, just be with it, we now have some choices. The fear is what has us hold our breath and what makes the silence awkward. If we learn to embody it, we can move beyond it courageously into action.
beautiful. And yes, of course, I never thought for a moment you were sitting around only, never speaking. It's simply that it's not common practice, perhaps. And that's what's also interesting about it. And you asked me, or you just said, how do I use it? And one of the things I do with coaching clients simply is introducing that minute of silence. that suddenly when people reconnect with who they are somehow and get that glimpse, that space, it starts to shift everything. And it's so powerful and so simple that you almost don't want to tell people it's part of the practice because they can do it for themselves. But no, I think there's also the accountability piece that actually, when I'm starting something new and I'm wary about what might happen, I still have to answer to somebody and talk about what it's bringing me. And of course, in stillness speaks. So, in speaking about what comes through that stillness, people see it, the benefit for themselves. But the courageous conversation, Carissa, I think that's such a powerful way of thinking about it because there's so much talk in our organizations, and often the emphasis of where we go is misguided or misaligned or misdirected. And actually, that courageousness of being able to say, hold on a minute, what's really happening here? And allowing what usually goes unsaid to come through. And I, I'm not getting to a question here. But yeah, go on.
I was going to say, it's also not only what's not been said, but what else is here that we've not seen? Okay, what else is here that's not seen? So very often what is going on one level or what's going on in one conversation or one relationship is going on somewhere else, right? We call it in coaching speak, parallel process, right? So what's going on within the leadership team or at the board is happening deeper down in the organization, right? And that has an impact. And so if we can see that, if we can actually see that this constantly changing living dynamic system that is called an organization or a team or a person or a relationship is it's constantly changing and moving. So how the hell do we think we can see it all? We can't. We're making educated guesses. We're trying to do our best, but allowing for that extra little bit of space to see what else haven't we seen and sensing into it just from a deeper and a different intelligence, right? Our physical intelligence. You know, am I at ease in my body or am I actually still very anxious and tense? Can I drop it? What is my emotion? What is my mood? What is the mood in the room? What we'd call the emotional field. So being able to read the wider energetics, all of that requires a level of, if you're really going to do it without judgment and just download what you already think is happening, you need to tap into that stillness or that non-judgment space that comes out of being still and quiet.
Like everything, then, I think you're reminding me I was with my sister, niece, and nephew at the weekend, and my nephew was 12, and he was talking about going on a skiing trip from school, which is really exciting. But he didn't want to be on the beginner's slope. He,
Okay.
he wanted to go straight into the skiing, like without even holding on to anything, probably. And we often want the result of something, or we want to be able to do it without the practice. And what's a reminder for people, perhaps, of the importance of practice?
Gee, I would ask you that very same question. I think it's everything. Uh, as I said, about 10 years ago, I realized I was running around so fast that I'm just kind of mimicking what's going on in the world. How can I possibly then have more space or be a conduit, right? A vessel, a container for change, for people to become aware of what's there and what they want to change, and actually then to hold that process. And it meant taking time to develop some new practices. It meant really having to start from saying, I'm going to get lost, and loss being a very creative act. So I can unlearn and replace my current habits with more helpful practices. So first notice my patterns and then find the right teachers. And breath work, we know, is so popular today. Breath work is clearly one of the most powerful, impactful ways. I've tried all sorts of things, I've tried psychedelics and other things, but those are nice little experiences. You still need to find effectively your daily discipline. And life offers you that opportunity all the time. So yes, I now have a morning practice. And there was a moment when I realized I put myself before anything else in the day, and that was quite a big thing. And then to become consistent with it. Yeah. And can you do the same in the evening, maybe? It doesn't have to be a long time. People have a perception it's going to be a lot of time, but there's something about that practice. Again, coming to a call, it's very easy to go on and off a Teams call, a Zoom call. Are you cultivating that moment of spaciousness to be there, to meet another with a level of curiosity and empathy, your presence? That is a gift. So I don't know, what are your practices? I have many, and I really do think we are our practices. I believe it, and I now try really and walk that talk. And one practice is to trust in life, and it's very hard to do. But that's where this stillness and silence bit comes up, because when you do that, you find that there is this incredibly supportive, I don't even, it's what do you want to call it, energy, space, field. You use your word, consciousness, that is there for you.
Absolutely a holding almost at times. And well, I suppose the practice, we're never going to be able to do things and get results without the practice. And I think practice is constant. I mean, that's what I feel anyway. And I have all different types of practices. But what you're reminding me there of was I was on the plane the other day. My sister lives in Prague, and I got on the flight, and the flight was on time and all of that. It was really relaxed, and I had a spare seat beside me. And this person, there was a bit of a kerfuffle behind me. I could hear kind of somebody being a bit like, and eventually this person comes and stands in front of me. So they'd obviously gone too far, couldn't find their seat, and then realized they were in the middle seat. And they were like, really kind of, that's my seat there. I don't like to sit in the middle. I'm not looking forward to this flight, and I haven't had a cigarette. And you can see everyone around just kind of like gasping, kind of, oh God. And I stood up and in that moment collected myself and I looked at this guy and I said, but you get to sit beside me.
And how did he respond?
Everything changed, like everything. That beautiful moment where you see how a mind kind of goes, what? That doesn't make any sense. And then the laughter follows. And we spoke for the whole journey. Our flight was delayed over an hour. We didn't stop talking until we got off the other side. And I think when you allow stuff to come out and that space, just that moment, because I could have easily gone, oh my God, how am I going to have to sit beside this guy? And then I would be upset and the tension would be in the air. But everybody had a good giggle around us as well.
Yes, yes, exactly. And I love that. As you say, you've actually found the gift, right? In that moment, there was an opportunity for you to bring humor and to absolutely shift the dynamic. And that required
Diffuse the tension.
diffuse the tension. And it took, you responded, you didn't react, right? It took a consciousness, it took an awakened brain, an awakened heart mind, even not head mind, to come with that playfulness, that courage, that authenticity. Yeah. And wonderful. Yeah. And save the day. Save the day. So that's fabulous. And I think that's what we are on. we can tap into much, much more than we do. It all becomes very, very serious. And maybe we sound very, very serious. I am quite playful. And so but I just have to say something. Silence has been a fascination of mine since I was a little kid, because I saw Marcel Marceau when I was a kid, the French mime artist. And I just couldn't believe how somebody could recreate life in such an authentic way that with nothing there, there was everything. And I said, I see life more as a mystery to be unfolded rather than a problem to be solved. And that magic and that delight that I felt, and I sort of believe that it's possible to unlock that in the client organizations that I work with every day, however serious things are, and they are, and however important. And I'm not talking about, of course, these are very often I'm working with for-profit businesses and there's a serious level of performance that needs to be achieved. However, these moments are what make it gorgeous, what make it worth it, make life meaningful. And that's another thing, is that silence allows you to tap into, why am I here? What's important? What do I really care about? What and when you come and respond from that place of what's meaningful, and if you really care about it, you find the courage. You extend yourself. And we've lost touch of that because we're just going too fast. Our brains can't go as fast as we think our bodies should. So, yeah, but the playfulness that is also accessible, the playful archetype of playfulness, which is where creativity comes and inspiration comes. Yeah, that is everything needed today too, when you want teams to innovate and you want people to really do things differently. So all of this comes out of a different tempo, a different rhythm, and it requires a trust, a level of trust that there is something, a much deeper wisdom than we are aware of in the room to tap into.
Hmm. And I mean, I get it. And one of the practices I have at the moment is trusting life more. And like you said there earlier, that's really difficult. But I think there's something about the playful side of that too. And when you wrote to me, you said, it's like giving our imagination permission to dance. And and that conjures up such an amazing image. Like life is serious. Absolutely. Things are serious, but we don't have to take ourselves so seriously. And one of the discoveries I made was I was very serious about my business. But when I'm with clients and everything, it's great, But when I was like focused on my business, it was hard work and it doesn't help.
Yes.
And
No.
so there is power in the playfulness.
Well, massively. Power in the playfulness, hugely. Laughter, again. When we laugh, we breathe. When we breathe, we get oxygens to our heads. I mean, it is science, and it's not anything more complicated than that. I've always felt that for me, it's been really important to kind of get to know the controls, not rather than the video controls or the television controls. I wanted to understand my own controls. Like, how do I work exactly? And again, this is a curious thing. And to notice when I was a child, I lived in many different countries and people spoke different languages. So that in that curiosity, what's really going on in the room beyond the words? So hence my excitement about mime. And I think probably what naturally drew me to communication style work, because it is a lot about the connection, the conversation, whether it's verbal or not, that goes on between people, and reading that and being able to quickly get to the essence of things, because you're actually listening beyond the words. And as we know, as coaches, for example, don't listen to the content, don't listen to the story, you're listening to what's underneath. And this is just going another level deeper. So it takes it out of the personal altogether. And there's insights out there, the collective consciousness, the whole idea of genius, right? That there is the zeitgeist, there's something out there, floating out there in the quantum, if you want, that we can access if we just give ourselves permission to do it.
And
And
and lean
yeah,
into it almost as well.
and lean into it and to try, really trust it. I don't know if you've ever heard Brother David Stendel-Rast. Have you ever heard David Stendel-Rast? He's a Benedictine monk who he must be in his 97 or something. I adore listening to him. And like other, I think these are a lot of mystics, whether you want to call them religious people or mystics, see them more as mystics, but certainly people who have faith in and trust in life. And he's very well known for gratefulness and the gratefulness organization. And if you listen to him, or you listen to an Eckhart Tolle, or you listen to a lot of people in that, they are funny. They are seriously funny. They get the joke. It is a game in a way. There is a joke, there is play. So bringing that sort of playfulness to life. So we kind of get over ourselves. And again, having a bit of space to hear the joke and to see your smallness, and find the courage to be a little bit bigger. This is.
And it brings a humility with it as well, I think, because when we're protective of our ego or of our words, there's a contraction too. Just letting go a little bit of that enables us, I suppose, if we're not taking ourselves as seriously and protecting ourselves, we can also be the same with others and hold that space for them.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, I think I do what I do because I want to create a world where there's more love and less fear. And so, really, what we're doing here, isn't it, is saying what are the conditions that you can create in yourself, in your team, in your organization, in your relationships, where you can respond with more love and less fear. And tapping into this infinite source of life, and to trust in it, that it really is there. You're not the one who got the short string and you're a bad person. No, really, truly, there is something generative there. And that's what we need to tap into if we're going to solve some of these big problems, if you're interested in it. But even if you're building a really great business in a really tricky world, this is helpful stuff. And it's free. That's the other thing. It's free. Has anybody ever worked that one out? And maybe somebody's going to come back at me, and I hope they do. But certainly, it is all around you all the time.
It
Yeah.
is. It is like a big joke, isn't it?
Yes.
It really is like, and the joke's on us.
Yes. 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 Yes.
The
Yes.
joke's on us.
And then that brings us the importance of, you said practices, but reflective practice.
Yes, which is where I wanted to go. So brilliant. Yes.
Reflective practice. And I really love that. I see when I'm speaking to some of my clients, organizations, they definitely are interested in this idea of having more of these, whether it's one-on-one, but certainly groups, where
Mhm.
it's going to speed up that not only deepen self-awareness, but this systems awareness, like what's really going on here, and to create that restorative. It's a sanctuary, right? Where we can just pause for a moment, where we can reflect, we can go deeper, we can restore, we can develop our skills as leaders, and as leaders who are also coaching and enabling and empowering others. And having worked a lot with coaches in this space, I can see that the same thing. If you work really intensely with organizations, you can get sucked into that same pace. So if we're going to have really powerful coaching in the world, we also need reflective practice, and reflective and embodied practices. The kind of somatic is all happening in the body anyway.
It is. And I think reflective practice, certainly when I was starting my coaching journey, it was one of the hardest things for me to practice. There's somebody listening today and they're thinking reflective practice is something I would love to do. Where do they start? What's the first step?
Yeah. And I'd love to understand why it was so hard for you to do. Actually, would you answer that first, and then I'll ask
Yeah.
the question? Yeah.
I suppose I wasn't used to it. I wasn't used to, no, at work, I was really always good at looking back at the year and placing myself in things and taking responsibility and everything. However, understanding what I was feeling about something or what was really going on underneath, perhaps I didn't know how to access that part. I
Mm.
didn't know that I could sit and write freely and let it out. Now I'm an absolute convert and everywhere I go, it's something I do with people. But I resisted it. And perhaps it was just the sitting still piece almost at the beginning.
Yeah. I just want to speak to that and then I'll answer
Of
your answer.
course.
The question is always, who are we becoming? Right? And so one of the reasons I think we resist something like this is we're frightened we're going to see something awful and we can't change it, or we don't want to change it, right? And if we can allow ourselves to go, this is juicy because I'm a constantly changing, evolving person, human. And by writing and allowing ourselves to observe our own, noticing our own noticing, uh, we can then see what is actually driving me. And actually, is that really who I am still? We're very good at telling stories, but is that still the story that I am living, or has life evolved into something else? So we're constantly allowing ourselves to find our edges and then to develop the practice to go more and more in the unknown, to stay with the curiosity and to go off of autopilot. I mean, habits are good, but to go off the autopilot and to go to have more courage to take some leaps and risks into to venturing into new spaces, into that fertile void that I spoke to, right? Which will always come back with something. So you've mentioned it's writing is a very easy way for many people. I often just speak into my phone sometimes. This morning I was thinking, but writing in a book is helpful. When I'm running one groups, just having a space held where you present and not necessarily getting advice, but getting people coming back at you with a story or what impact that had on them and hearing that. So now you have this bigger mirror to see yourself and to listen again, a deeper quality of listening to develop your own self-awareness, but also to understand better the impact of your actions and whatever you're doing. The writing is definitely good, and drawing is a wonderful way. All of these activities and sitting in nature. So another way is a simple nature practice is to go to the same sitting spot every day and just sit and be with things. And it's amazing what just letting it flow through. What would you say has been most powerful for you?
I would say the writing, Carissa, and sometimes perhaps in conversation too. If you can have a courageous conversation to give voice to something that perhaps you didn't know would come out until somebody asked you a specific question. Questions are everything. And I don't know if it's James Clear that says this. It's about the better question. It's always about finding that right question. And some questions won't provoke that answer that really needs to emerge. But if you keep looking for those questions, those beautiful questions, they change. And one of the most powerful things that happened to me, I would say, actually, I was on a podcast interview. I was interviewing like we're doing now. And at the end of the call, the person said to me, "How are you?" And it was the way this person asked it. Suddenly, I realized I'm not well. I'm
Mhm.
really not. And it was a huge catalyst for me because at the time I was going through menopause and I was having a terrible time, but I wasn't admitting it to myself. I was keeping calm and carrying on. So I think often the conversation is very powerful for me, but the writing is incredible as well because there's something very freeing about
Yeah.
that too.
Yes. And I just actually want to bring in some cultural differences. As you're telling your story, I was thinking of one individual I was working with last year, coaching supervision, and he's a very seasoned practitioner. And every time I work with Japan, the request is, can we have silences? It's not only because of the translation of words, somehow it's an important cultural to respect this, having that space for a natural order of things to emerge. And
Ma space.
yeah,
The space between. I think it's one of the most beautiful concepts. The notes on a page, the
yeah,
music, without the space between them, they're meaningless.
exactly, exactly. Oh, Yo-Yo Mars, absolutely. When he
Yes,
talks about it in that beautiful, there's a beautiful podcast interview with him and Krista Tippett on being. It was one of the first ones I listened to years and years ago. Yes, so exactly that, which takes us back to the, the space in between. So just that for some, it might be easier to cultivate this reflective, the stillness needed to be able to reflect and to notice your own noticing. I think that's notice your own noticing. So when you've written, if you write a journal, people write journals and then you put it away. If you're doing reflective writing, you write and then you look back over what you wrote. What are you noticing? So when I do like a culture development program or a leadership development program, the old days they used to just send a survey, let's tick some boxes. Now I really craft questions. You get the responses and then send questions out again to get people to look at what was the state of mind, the habit of mind in which you answered that question. You're right. So it's this really deepening of your awareness. Who are you being? What are you paying attention to? And this is the bit that's really juicy.
totally. My thing is we reflect, we review, and we reveal. And
Yes.
absolutely, you notice what you're noticing. Carissa, we are out of time. I usually get us finished right on time, but we've run over slightly. But I'd love you to tell people how they can learn more about you, where to connect with you.
Thank you, first of all, Susan. I've really enjoyed it. It's wonderful. So the easiest thing is to go to LinkedIn, Carissa Bub, or to my website, carissabub.com. Very simple. Or give me a call. You'll find the numbers everywhere, so that's fine. But I really appreciate it. And I'm doing a webinar in a couple of months, which I'm really looking forward to, and I'm challenging myself. It's 90 minutes in silence, playing with silence. I, I'm busy constructing it. It's just a sort of playful thing, but I've dreamt about it for a while. So who knows? It might be a complete mess, or it might be something, whatever it is, it'll reveal some fascinating facts.
Well, and on that silence piece, I've gone to a couple of, there's the London Writers Salon, I think they're called, and I've gone to a couple of their writing salons where they basically set a prompt right at the beginning or a little intro, and then it's 55 minutes of silence while you work on whatever you want. And then back again. But that's a different silence. It's a silence to focus and concentrate on something you're working on.
Definitely, yeah, that sort of wild writing.
And there's the center of awakening as well. And you can dial in on a Monday and sit in silence for 30 minutes with a group.
Absolutely. Or if you
Yeah.
want to go for a Vipassana retreat for 10 days,
Well,
which is another conversation. But here I'm really talking about it in the sense of almost like these atomic habits. How to
yeah.
start to pay attention more. So you develop your systems awareness so you can think more strategically, think bigger. The relational thinking, can you see the connections between things? The quality of our lives is so much driven by the quality of our connections. Can we really join the dots? Generally, we're used to practicing following a process, or we're used to a certain structure. Can we see the connectedness between the teams in this group? Can we see the interconnectedness between our business and our strategic partners and the supply chain, the bigger piece, right? We're needing to see more and more of the connections that allows you to hold more and more of the complexity. And that's what this is really about. And by practicing this reflective practice, this tapping into stillness and silence, we can start to begin to sense into and see more of what is there.
And on that note, I will say thank you so much for being such a fascinating guest and for all your insights today, Carissa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and all the best for 2025.
And to you. Thank you for joining me today on Life Beyond the Numbers. If something in this episode resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you've enjoyed this conversation, please take a moment to leave a review. It helps others like us discover this podcast and join in our conversation. Until next time, keep exploring the human side of work life.